आत्मनिर्भर भारत की क्रांति ने भारत की इकोनॉमी को एक नई दिशा दी है। इकोनॉमी की मजबूती होती है बिजनेस से, और बिजनेस का मतलब है रिस्क, जिसकी वजह से पहले लोग बिजनेस करने के अपने सपने को अधूरा छोड़ देते थे। इसका मेन रीजन होता था जानकारी का अभाव। कोई भी बिजनेस स्टार्ट करने से पहले ढेरों सवाल होते हैं जिनके जवाब पहले आसानी से नहीं मिल पाते थे, पर अब प्रॉपर नॉलेज के साथ एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप आपके सपने को पंख देने के लिए तैयार है। तो आपके बिजनेस की प्रॉपर प्लानिंग और उससे रिलेटेड हर तरह की ब्रेनस्टॉर्मिंग को कामयाब बनाने के लिए आपका पसंदीदा यूट्यूब चैनल बिजनेस पाठशाला आपके लिए लेकर आ रहा है बिजनेस की पाठशाला, जहां आपको सिखाई जाएंगी बिजनेस स्टार्ट करने से पहले की सभी टेक्निक्स जो आपको बिजनेस प्लान को सफल बनाए रखने में निश्चित तौर पर मदद करेगी। यह आपके लिए अवेलेबल होगा एवरी मंथ 2nd and 4th मंडे दोपहर 3 बजे से सिर्फ आपके अपने YouTube चैनल बिजनेस पाठशाला पर। साथ ही अगर आपको इस सेशन से रिलेटेड कोई भी डाउट है या आपके कुछ सवाल हैं, तो आप हमारे एक्सपर्ट से डायरेक्टली जुड़ सकते हैं जूम सेशन के माध्यम से, जिसका लिंक आपके लिए चैट बॉक्स पर अवेलेबल है। नेशन चॉइस अवार्ड 100 टॉप एजुकेटर्स, यंग ऑथर ऑफ द ईयर 2020, यूथ लीडर अवार्ड और करमवीर चक्र अवार्ड जैसे कई अवार्ड से सम्मानित श्री यश तिवारी जी मेंटरशिप, पब्लिक स्पीकिंग और ट्रेनिंग के क्षेत्र में एक जाना माना नाम है। ग्लोबली रिनाउंड प्लेटफॉर्म टेडएक्स पर टेड टॉक और जोश टॉक्स डिलीवर कर चुके श्री यश तिवारी जी मेंटल हेल्थ एडवोकेट और मोटिवेशनल गाइड के रूप में भी प्रसिद्ध हैं। ब्लिस्टर्स ऑफ द बैटल, अ सेलिब्रेशन इन ट्रिब्यूलेशन और पैंडेमिक 2020, राइफ ऑफ द वायरस जैसी बेस्ट सेलर्स के ऑथर श्री यश तिवारी जी ने विजन और पैशन से अपनी अलग और खास पहचान बनाई है। देश विदेश में अपनी प्रतिभा से सभी को प्रभावित कर चुके श्री यश तिवारी जी इंटरनेशनल रिकॉर्ड होल्डर के अलावा इंटरनेशनल रेडियो होस्ट के तौर पर भी लोकप्रिय हैं। ग्लोबल यूथ मेंटर और सॉफ्ट स्किल ट्रेनर श्री यश तिवारी जी का बिजनेस पाठशाला में एक्सपर्ट के तौर पर हम स्वागत करते हैं।
Hi there, this is Yash Tiwari, a global youth mentor and international award-winning public speaker, a best-selling author, and always very delighted to guide the aspiring entrepreneurs. In this session today, we are going to be talking about something very important for any startup, which, as you can see on the screen right now, is all about accelerating your startup. Now you might be wondering, what does that even mean? What does this term refer to? Because a startup is not a vehicle, right? A startup is a startup. How can you possibly accelerate it? And it is a good question which should be coming up in your mind, but the answer is even more important for you as an aspiring entrepreneur to figure out, understand, and also implement in terms of the startup that you are establishing. Here we are talking about accelerating the initiative that you have taken, whether it might be in terms of fast tracking the process of initiating a startup, or it might be in terms of generating better growth for your startup, or it might be in terms of expanding the commercialization of your startup, or it might be even in terms of growing the customer base that you have out of your startup. When it comes to a startup that you have initiated, it is all about continuing with the growth. Yes, there are ideas, there are concepts, there are agendas with which you begin something, with which you initiate the process of a platform. But then eventually you have to understand, how do you grow further? How do you expand further? If you are starting in one city, how do you go to other cities? If you are beginning in one territory, how do you expand to the other territories? If you are starting with just 5 people in your team, how do you expand to 50 people? These are the things which can sound basic, but to an actual aspiring entrepreneur are monumental if you think about it. For any aspiring entrepreneur, it is difficult at times to even understand what growth is supposed to look like. It can be difficult at times to even figure out what this expansion is needed to appear like. And until and unless you have a proper clarity on what this expansion is supposed to be, how can you possibly go on to expand the startup or accelerate the startup that you have initiated? So in this session today, we are going to have a lot of discussion on what does this acceleration or expansion of your startup really refers to, what is its true meaning, and most importantly, how do you do it? Once you have understood what this acceleration genuinely refers to, how do you work on it? How do you make sure that your startup actually is getting expanded? It is actually growing, it is genuinely expanding and accelerating at the best pace you possibly can see it to be. This is what we are going to be communicating about in this wonderful session that we have planned up for you. So continuing with our discussion, let us begin by understanding the introductory dimensions of what a startup refers to, as well as the effective growth of a startup. Now, many of you might be wondering that why are we even introducing the startup at all? Because most of you as aspiring entrepreneurs already know what a startup refers to, right? But what if I tell you that what you know can be much different than what a startup in reality, in the real world, is supposed to be like, is genuinely needed to be like? I know this might come as a surprise, but that is the truth. Before I start guiding you and mentoring you about how do you expand the startup, how do you grow the startup, there are things needed to be learned about the concept of startup in the first place. Things that define what a startup is needed to be rather than what it is presumed to be by majority of people. And it is not about, let's say, belittling the definitions that exist for this terminology. It is just about understanding the actuality, the truth, the reality of what a startup is supposed to be like. Because once you realize that, is only when you will be able to realize how to work on it, how to grow it, how to develop it, how to conceptualize it, and how to bring it out in the real world to create an actual impact. Which is where the definition of a startup also is quite in connection with. Creating a startup is less like starting a business or a company for the sake of it, and more like innovating something or a concept or an idea to create that positive impact on the world. Most of the aspiring entrepreneurs are coming up in the tough competition of today's modern world, commercialized world, if you may like to call it that way, or the globalized world, if you may like to call it that way, and they are able to survive only because they are unique, only because they are coming up with a concept that is genuinely noble, that is genuinely impacting, and that actually can contribute something to the world. When we are talking about a startup as a concept, on a very initial stage, I'm not even talking about the growth of it as of yet. I'm just talking about a startup as a concept to begin with. Now, when we're talking about the startup as a concept in the very initial stage of it, think of it this way. You can start a company just for the commercial gains out of it, or you can start a company while also maintaining your commercial gains, because that of course you require for the further expansion, but with a concept, with an idea, with a topic in your mind, with a product in your mind, with a service in your mind, which actually is revolutionary, which genuinely is innovative, which really is something that is much different than what all exists in the world at the moment. Because believe it when I say this, this is where the actual acceleration and the growth of the startup begins with. It might sound weird that we are talking about the fact that your startup starts growing even when it is not a startup and you're just thinking about a topic, but trust me when I say this. If you are coming up with a topic which is revolutionary and unique and different than the other platforms that exist in the world, you already are getting an edge in the market. You already are achieving a sense of acceleration or a prospective growth for your platform in the future, in the present tense. for the future when your startup can grow, the growth of it begins in the present tense when you are coming up with a topic for it, a concept for it. So even the very initial ideation stage or the conceptualization stage matters a great deal. You as an aspiring entrepreneur who just want to rush through the process might be thinking that it is only when fundings happen on a large scale or when customers start pouring in on a very large scale, which of course would take a year or so, but that is not the case all of the time. Sometimes even the well established companies have to toil a lot to get proper funding. Sometimes even companies that have a great customer base are not able to expand further than that. So it is not about, having a timeline set in your mind all of the time that this is the amount of time within which your customers will be so and so or the fundings will be so and so. It is important, but in the very initial stage of it all, your focus genuinely has to be on how unique of a concept or how unique of a topic you are able to come up with. Because that uniqueness is what kickstarts the acceleration of a bigger concept or a bigger idea that you are possibly able to come up with, which will give you an edge in the globalized market of today. And then of course, when we talk about the term of the effective growth, when we are looking at the term which says the effective growth of the startup or the effective growth of the idea that you are coming up with, that refers to something very specifically as well, much beyond the general perception around it, much beyond the, we can say, presumption around what growth is supposed to look like. So growth isn't always supposed to be in terms of the number of customers that you have more than you had last month. I mean, of course, that is one of the benchmarks, that is one of the avenues where the growth is required, where the growth happens, but then it is not the only form of growth that you are supposed to look for when you are talking about a startup. In a startup, or while establishing a startup, the growth can happen in so many ways. It can happen in terms of the infrastructure of the building where you are working right now, where you are operational right now. It might be in terms of the technology. You are able to grow your softwares from 2 to 4. It might be in terms of course, the funding that you're receiving, the investors that you have on board. It might be simply in terms of the expansion of the team itself. You had 5 individuals working for you on the content front earlier. Now you have 15 individuals working and generating the content regularly. So it can look like so many things when we are talking about a startup and not just one thing in specificity, because growth is supposed to be diverse, especially in the current state of the market, in the current globalized world that we are living in right now. Growth actually is needed to be diverse. You cannot just depend on the customers to grow as a signal for the growth of your platform. That is essential, but that is only essential in one area. The other areas are also equally and sometimes even more essential for you to work upon, for you to, let's say, expand upon and grow upon. So the effective growth is something which is a bit different than the generic growth that might be perceived in terms of the acceleration of a startup. The effective growth refers to the diversified growth across all the avenues of your startup that you are coming up with, that you are initiating, which gives you an edge as an aspiring entrepreneur and puts your startup and your platform on the forefront. So now, continuing with our discussion, let us talk about what all is needed to be worked upon. Because for a startup to work, there are things to work upon as well. For the acceleration of a startup to work, there are actual categories of avenues that are needed to be worked upon. As you can see on the screen right now, there are some specific categories that have been listed for you, starting with the brand image. Then you have the business plan. Then you of course have the passions to work upon. Then comes the investors, after which comes the marketing, and then eventually you have the customer service. Now, one cannot say that these are the only areas that are needed to be worked upon in order to expand or accelerate your startup, but these are for sure the fundamentals that are needed to be worked upon. These areas are what formulate the foundation based on which the pillars of your startup are raised upon. So you have to figure out how these areas can be worked upon in priority, beyond which of course there can be so many other avenues as well where the growth is worked upon, where the acceleration of the startup is focused on. But let us focus on these fundamentals for now, for you to have a better understanding of what the acceleration of your startup is needed to look like. Firstly comes the brand image. Now, brand image is something which can feel very daunting if you think about it, because brand image is not a simple thing to understand. Nobody is saying that the brand image is only, the logo or the tagline or the name that you have for your company. It is surely a part of it. It is surely one of the areas of the startup that you are initiating. Like, what kind of a logo do you have, or what kind of a tagline do you have, or what is even the name of your platform, which is of course considered to be something that can grab attention. Like, for example, why is it said that whenever you are, let's say reading a book or you're watching a movie, the more catchy the title is, the easier it becomes for you to connect with that movie, or watch that entire movie, or connect with that book, or read that entire book, or even decide to read it in the first place. Because that title is important. It grabs the attention of the readers or the viewers in the first 5 seconds itself. So just like that, when a person is reading about, let's say, your startup, within the first 5 seconds, if you're able to grab their attention just with the help of a very stylistically unique logo that you have, or a very stylistically unique tagline that you have, or a very understandably intriguing title name that you have for your brand, of course it will do a lot to further your brand image, to expand your brand image. But this is where, the point comes into play, which I was stating earlier, that even brand image can be a bit complex to figure out for most aspiring entrepreneurs, because of the simple fact that brand image is not just these things. It is these things, but not just the title, or not just the tagline, or not just the picture. The brand image transcends to the working environment of your company as well, which basically is talked about in the marketplace. Brand image also refers to how well your company is represented across various avenues, how good you are doing in comparison of your competitors, or how well you are in terms with of your competitors, what kind of a customer base do you have, how many customers do you have, how much is actual revenue that is being generated, which you are able to assure, your investors as well. Everything that basically represents the viability of your brand becomes your brand image. Any controversy, it impacts how your brand looks like. Any act of goodwill, it impacts how your brand looks like. Any, let's say, public service event that you're organizing, which furthers the community feeling and appreciation towards your company, towards your platform, towards your startup, it impacts the brand image that can be of your brand, or that can be of your startup. So overall, the brand image hugely depends on how much and how well your company is represented in the world. After which comes the second category, which is of the business plan. Now, when we're talking about the business plan, we are of course going to be discussing about these terms in very detail as we go further in the session today. But on an introductory level, when we are talking about the business plan, think about the business plan as something which is supposed to, let's say, deliver that foundation, that first brick which you have to put down in order to raise the building of your startup. What is that brick? How strong is it? Can it uphold the entire foundation that you're going to be raising, the pillars of the entire building that you're going to be raising? That first brick that we are talking about. On a very ideation stage, on a very initial stage, when you're just coming up with a concept, a business plan is something which can basically act like a guideline, a rule book, a guidebook for not just you as the, let's say the CEO of your startup, but even for every single person, from the content writers to the technical backend team. Any person who is working in accordance to, or in collaboration with, or at the startup itself, they need to have a concrete business plan idea provided by you, so that they know what they are working towards and what they are working for, from the very basic working processes to even how to use a certain system, or what are the projected growth rates, or what are the projected customer rates in the coming months. Everything needs to be conceptualized beforehand. so that you have a concrete idea of what kind of a direction you want to take ahead with your startup, in what direction you want to accelerate a startup. Because it is one thing to say that you want to accelerate your startup, but in what direction, in what pathway, on what road ahead do you want to accelerate? That comes from the business plan which you are able to decide, or which you need to decide. After which comes the point of the passions. Now, passion is something which I would say is essential in all the walks of life, in all the areas of life, in all the avenues of life. But in specificity, when we are talking about the startups, passions become even more important for some very simple reasons. Firstly, without passion, how will you even feel confident while working towards that startup? Secondly, without passion, how will you be able to consistently put in the best amount of effort that is required from you? Thirdly, without passion, how do you think you will be able to, let's say, impact the others around you who need to be very passionate about the startup as well? If you are doing something and you have people, you have workers, you have staffers, you have team members who are working for you on that project, it is your passion which will invigorate them as well. It is your excellence and your energy and your enthusiasm towards the topic which will invigorate your audiences as well as your team members too. So in certain terminologies, in the simplest of terms, for your startup to work properly, for your platform to work properly, it needs to be driven with an energy of passion for sure, which sounds philosophical, but trust me when I say this, it is needed. Without passion, establishing any sort of a startup, whether it is technical or it is creative, whatever it might be, can be quite daunting. And with passion, everything is simplified because you will be doing things out of genuine interest and inclination, which of course will be reflected on your team as well. After that comes the point of the investors, as you can see on the screen right now. Now this is where things start getting a bit tricky as well as a bit interesting as well, because we are talking about an area to work upon, or an avenue to work upon, or a stage in the process of the growth of your startup to work upon, where the commercial growth is also being focused upon a great deal. And secondly, the investors are anyway required to grow the startup, whether you talk about the technology or you talk about the infrastructure, or even if you talk about the team. For all of it to really get expanded, for you to be able to hire more people, for you to be able to begin with that first ever software for your startup that you require, or for you to be able to, let's say, grow the infrastructure of wherever you are working, in all those avenues, the revenue of course plays a huge role, the profit margins play a huge role, but then the investors might be where the actual expansion, the genuine growth is happening, especially in the initial phase of the startup, when you are still dependent on the external sources of funding or the external sources of the commercial support that you require for the growth of your startup. So especially in an initial stage, but even for the most established platforms in the longer run as well, investors play a huge role in the growth and the overall acceleration of the platform that you have, the startup that you have. And we will definitely talk further about it as we go ahead in the session as well. After which comes the point of marketing. Now, marketing is where things get even more interesting. As you can see, progressively it is getting more and more interesting for any aspiring entrepreneur and even for the startup as a whole. Because marketing is where you do the most fun. I know marketing is supposed to be told as a very daunting, as a very challenging, as a very difficult task. But I would recommend you to look at this marketing with a very excited and a very positive point of view, because that excitement, trust me, it generates a lot of potential in the marketing activities itself. The more excited you are to represent the brand that you have or further improve the brand image of the platform, the better the marketing will be as well. The more passionate you are towards the platform, the better the marketing will be as well. But marketing in itself is supposed to be a very essential element of the startup, if you may call it that way, because see, there are things as an aspiring entrepreneur which you can just put your foot down for and say that, okay, this is your choice, this is what you want to do, this is not your choice, this is something that you do not want to do, it is totally your call. But Marketing is something which cannot be considered as a choice, especially in the globalized climate of today's modern world. You can no longer say that do you want to invest anything in the marketing, if the marketing processes or not. Do you want to even think about marketing about your products or your services or your platform or not? Now it is not a choice, it is a necessity. It is not about whether you want to or you do not want to, it is the fact that you have to do the marketing. Whatever services you have, they need to be marketed. Whatever products you have, they require to be marketed. Whatever startup you have started, it needs to be properly promoted and represented on a global pedestal. Which is why the marketing itself assumes a very important role and a very integral role in the overall acceleration process of any startup or any idea that you're coming up with. And we are definitely going to be talking about how to do that marketing in just a short while as well. After which, as you can see, comes the point of the customer service. Now, customer service is something which I would consider to be a point that you think about with a great deal of focus in the entire process of the acceleration of any startup or any platform, because customers are going to be the end point of this entire journey of establishing a startup. Of course, that keeps on growing, the journey keeps on expanding, but if we look at it in a very objective sense, then the ideation is where it all begins, the conceptualization is where it all begins, but it all comes down to the customers that you have. And how you are able to cater to those customers is what is even more important for the growth of your platform. Like, if you say that you want your customers to be so loyal that they communicate, they do the word of mouth communication, the word of mouth promotion for your platform. If you are saying that you want your customers to be so loyal that they are doing the word of mouth marketing for you on their own without having to be nudged about it or budged about it, then how will that happen? It will happen when you actually are catering to the needs of your customers. First of all, you are fulfilling their necessities, their requirements with your products, with your services, with your startup. Second of all, you are coming out in the market as somebody, as an entity, as a startup that is genuinely unique. Thirdly, and fourth and most important, you are valuing them. You are respecting your customers. You are calling them an entity in your journey of being an aspiring entrepreneur that you wholeheartedly depend upon, that you respect a lot, and that you want to further expand your platform for. So when you do that, when you start valuing your customers, that is where the actual growth of your startup starts taking place, because if they are the end consumers of whatever you are working upon, whether it is a product or a service, then they have to be the one at the very forefront and in the very much focus as well. Now, when we are talking about further growing the startup, let us take all of these points with a bit of description for you to understand how to work on things like the brand image or the business plan or grow the passion, or let's say even improve the customer experience at your platform. Firstly, let us talk about the brand image. So let us try to understand what the brand image can really look like. Firstly, let us try to get an idea of what this brand image is supposed to look like, after which we will talk about how to work on the brand image as well. So when we are talking of the brand image, we need to think of the representation. The simplest of word which you can think of should be representation, that basically defines what brand image is needed to look like. How are you, or how well are you represented in the market? How are you, or how well are you represented in a territory where your company is working? Like, for example, at times there are certain localities, there are certain regions where some very established restaurants might be placed up, some very established and some very renowned and even expensive franchised restaurants might be there, but then it is this one singular, let's say, dhaba of some sort or a food stall of some sort which is grabbing the most attention, which is basically garnishing the greatest of attention and crowd for anyone and from anyone around the region. Why is it that in comparison of the other well-established renowned restaurants, this certain food stall is able to grab a lot of attention all of the sudden? It is because that food stall might be doing something a bit different than what the other competitors are doing in the market. Even though being very simplistic, it might be doing something that is uniquely provocative, interestingly intriguing for the customer base out there. Something that generates an even more interesting brand image for the platform. And this is what I wanted to talk about. The brand image should always be interesting, but it should always be positively interesting. You want to grow the brand image, you want to grow the mentions of your platform across all the platforms, across all the avenues, across all the conversations that are happening in the market or even outside. But you want all of that to be in the positive side of it all. You want the people to say that they are opting your startup or they are opting your company for the services that they require or the products that they require because it genuinely is the best one, or for the very least it is better than the others. There is something uniquely creative, something uniquely different in terms of whatever you are offering in comparison to even the well-established competitors that might be there out in the market. Now, this is where another very interesting point comes into play, which is of something that we were discussing about at the very initial part of the session today as well. The concept itself, the topic that you're coming up with. Brand image can definitely be expanded upon, brand image can definitely be improved if the idea or the topic that you're coming up with is itself very noble, is itself very genuinely positively impacting for the audience, is itself very unique. When you are starting at a place of let's say genuine global contribution to the world, genuine positive contribution to the world with the basic idea that you're coming up with, whether it is to educate or it is to spread awareness or whatever it might be for you individually, or delivering a service to the world even at a less rate, which is very essential for them but generally is very expensive, it generates a greater representation of the platform as a whole as well. Of course, you have to formulate a strong business plan for it to sustain, for it to be viable in the longer run for you as a company, for you as an entrepreneur as well. But when we are talking about it in a very generic sense, the brand image can definitely be furthered with having a good intention, a good concept, and a noble topic to work with in the very initial stage of the startup itself. Now, when we are talking about the brand image, there can be so many other things that can be done as well, whether it is in terms of the marketing initiatives that you take. Like what happens is basically marketing is something that we are going to be talking about later in the session anyway. But with brand image, the marketing is somewhat, the other side of the same coin. There is one coin, one side is the brand image, the other side is the marketing. The better you do with the marketing, the greater will be the brand image. The more will be the brand image in the general eye, the greater would be the marketing, even the automatic marketing, the word of mouth communication and promotion that we were talking about earlier, that your customers are expanding your startup or expanding the growth or the sales of your platform just by talking a lot about your platform, because they liked your services so much, because they liked your product so much. Somewhere that is of course expanding your brand image, but that is doing an automated we can say marketing as well for your platform. So all in all, it is very much interconnected with one another, that when you expand on the marketing front, the brand image automatically grows. At times there are companies, there are startups who go for the paid marketing initiatives or campaigns just because they are in dire requirement to expand the brand image. Just because, at least on a very initial level, they need to spread awareness about the platform that they have come up with. So it is quite obvious that when you are working on the marketing initiatives, the brand image is automatically benefited from the same. Now, as we go further with the session, the next point is going to be all about the business plan. Now, business plan is supposed to be very uniquely creative. That is the first thing. But secondly, why it is needed to be more uniquely creative is because of a simple reason. When I say that your brand image depends hugely on what you are working on, what kind of a business methodology you are working on, what kind of a business mindset and ideology you're working on, as well as how you are catering to the customers a bit different than your competitors, you really need to be different. You genuinely have to be contrastingly different in comparison to the other competitors that already exist in the market. If you're coming up with, let's say, a burger joint, a burger cafe of some sort, and you know that even in the territory that you are starting with your burger cafe, there are at least 20 something other established, well established and renowned burger cafes that already exist. What is it that you can offer better? What can be your business plan which is different than the others? How can your business plan be more efficient or more advanced or more thought-provoking or even more interesting or even more, let's say, beneficial for the customers, for your team members, for anybody and everybody associated with your startup, that makes you a more profitable entity? Profitable not just in the sense of the commerciality, but in terms of the long-term viability as well. Now, all of that depends hugely on the business plan. Even the growth of the platform that we are talking about, it depends hugely on the business plan, because business plan is where you are basically streamlining the process of how your startup is going to function, how a certain software is supposed to be used, how the team is supposed to work on regular basis, what the schedules are supposed to be looking like, what kind of products and prototyping needs to be done in a certain set timeline, how the investors should be approached as well, what kind of a concept should be presented in all the events that you're going for, what is the concept that you're actually working for in terms of your startup. Everything that defines how your startup is going to function and how every person in your startup is going to function is what your business plan should be considered all about. Now, the reason why this business plan becomes so important in the overall growth of your startup is because of a simple fact. When your business plan is strong, the brand image is improved. The marketing is automatically improved. The investors want to hop in and invest something to your platform. The customers want to check out your platform and see what kind of products they can also avail, because there is already so much good going on and being spoken about the platform that you have started. When your business plan is strong, internally even, you are able to function in a better manner. You are able to even feel more passionate towards your startup because you have this sort of a GPS navigation system, a guidebook in your hand about how everything should be done in a seamlessly functional manner. Your employees are happier. They are more comfortable to work in a platform where the business plan is clear, where there is a sense of clarity, a sense of clarification on how everything is supposed to be done with that platform or in that platform. There is a retention of the staffers that you have. They are not willing to leave the platform. They are genuinely willing to stay because of how strong of a business plan you have in your hand. Even on a very basic level, for your own self, like I said earlier, a GPS navigation system of a sort is set, because you know exactly how and where and in what direction you want to steer or you need to steer your startup. If I say that you need to accelerate your startup, in what direction you are accelerating it is going to be based on the business plan that you are coming up with. So that sort of an acceleration is required to be dependent on what is the business plan going to be, which eventually gives you a sense of greater growth in the market, in the customer base, and across all the avenues in the today's globalized world that we are living in. Now, as we walk further with the session, we are going to be talking about the passion. Now, passion is where a lot of investment has to be done. And we of course talk about the investment in terms of the investors, but passion requires a whole different sort of investment. This investment is coming from you, and by the way, it is not a monetary investment. I'm not talking about a commercial investment over here. I am talking about standing on your toes for hours upon hours straight when you are guiding your team about what the business plan is and what they have to do on that present day. I am talking about sitting in your office even beyond the working hours because you have to most certainly get that assignment done for the next day's shipment or whatever it might be. I am talking about thinking of your platform and all that you can do about it day and night, in a sense that genuinely you feel happy when you think about it. It is the happiest moment for you to genuinely think about the next product or the next service or the next we can say some sort of an entity you are willing to launch through the platform that you have created. I am talking about genuinely feeling a joy when you are catering to the needs of your customers. A startup is supposed to be something that is driven with passion. It is not something that should only be driven with a commercial, let's say, requirement or a commercial inclination or a commercial mindset. I know it is supposed to be about the commercials as well. A huge part of your growth depends on how commercially viable you are, or how commercially stable you are, or not stable perhaps, but how much growth you are able to establish in terms of the commercialities as well. How greater of a revenue are you able to generate in this quarter? How bigger of an investment are you able to let's say bag in this particular area? It all is required, it all is necessary, but then all of that comes from a place of passion. And when it does, when passion is what is driving all the initiatives that you're taking for the further growth of your startup, is when your startup is solidified as well. Because passion is something which solidifies whatever you are doing. Everything that you will be doing will be coming from a place of ambition, will be coming from a place of joy. So automatically you will feel happy whenever you are doing what you are doing. Your employees will feel happy as well whenever they see you doing what you are doing, and they would also want to do their level best. And this is something which can come as a leadership advice as well. As the leader in a company, as somebody who is leading the other employees, or who is leading the other staffers or other individuals, team members in a platform, if you may like to call it that way, you need to show a degree of genuine inclination towards what all you are doing, everything that you are doing, rather than always cribbing about the smallest of things or just complaining about the smallest of issues. You need to assume the position of standing tall and saying that there might be an issue, but as a leader, I feel passionate enough to deal with it, because I feel passionate enough to stand for my startup. I feel passionate and dedicated enough to take a stand and work on this initiative that we have conceptualized. That only comes from the space of having a genuine passion towards what you are doing, which I think also is very much dependent on what kind of a concept you are coming up with. Like if you are, let's say, an absolute foodie, you are genuinely passionate about food, whether it is fast food or it is traditional food or it is some other sort of a cuisine. If you are venturing in that area, of course it will require for you to have the entrepreneurial skills as well, the managerial skills as well, the administrative skills as well, the technical skills as well. But the concept itself, based on which everything else is working upon, if that is something which you personally align with, if it is a restaurant that you're opening up rather than let's say a bookshop, it will actually make you feel interested towards doing whatever you are doing. If you're somebody who is very much interested into fitness, but you are forcing yourself to initiate a startup which is in a whole different industry whatsoever, that neither you have any knowledge about nor you have any interest about whatsoever, chances are that had you taken the other avenue as your goal, as your concept for whatever kind of a startup you want to come up with, it could have worked even better. So when you conceptualize a startup based on what you are passionate about, and also when you maintain that passion towards whatever sort of a startup you have taken up, that is where the actual growth of your platform takes place. Now, as we go further in the session, the next point is going to be all about the investors. Now, investors are supposed to be an entity which are needed to support you from the very initial stage of, basically establishing or even bringing a startup in the world. Many a times startups are depending on investors for even the basic prototypes that they need to create, for the actual conceptualization of the real product lines or the services that they have in plan for their platform. And then sometimes even after all of that is done, after you have completed the investments, you have gone through a basic growth in the market as well, for even the other areas, like I was saying, the infrastructure, the team expansion, the expansion of the technology that you have, all of these things of course can depend on the revenues that you're generating, but many a times going for investors for the same can be a better option, can be a more viable and a suitable and an easier option. Sometimes the startups, even though they have a lot of potential, they are presently not able to generate the revenue that they require for the actual growth or acceleration. Once again, the investors come into play and they play a huge role. But this is where a connective tissue is found in terms of what we are discussing right now and what we just discussed a while back. The investors, or the investments I should say, the investments hugely depend on what kind of a business plan do you have, or even if you have a proper business plan or not. If you're going to somebody, like taking a very hypothetical example, a very simple example to understand, if you're going to somebody and you are asking of them for a certain XYZ amount of investment for a specific area's growth in your platform, in your startup, they ask, what is your startup all about? Let's say that you are able to talk about it. But the second question that they ask is, sure, they are willing to invest, but how exactly are you going to be utilizing that investment? Where exactly will that investment go? What growth will it generally generate, and what kind of a long-term profitable collaboration can be sensed with the investment that is being done? Is there any idea about it? Now, in that moment, your business plan is what you depend upon. If it is clear, if you have a thorough understanding of it, and if you have a thorough business plan in place, you will be able to speak about it right away, and you will be able to basically go in a positive direction as well with the same. But if at this moment the business plan is not strong, the business plan does not have that sense of a gravity, or even if you are not yourself clear about what kind of a business plan do you have, or what does your business plan represent or entail or contain or is all about, chances are that it might create an issue in terms of the investments as well. Because for anybody who is investing in your platform, they need to know that your platform actually is viable or it has a potential. At times investors are not even looking at how presently you are doing, but they are looking at how much potential does your startup has, that in the longer run perhaps it can do something marvelous, it can do something wonderful. They need to see that you have a potential, they need to see that you have a clarity, they need to see that you have an actual strong business plan to work with. Which is why investments to a huge degree depend on the business plan, and the acceleration of your startup, the growth of your startup, can to a huge degree depend on the investments as well. But what other things the acceleration of your startup depend upon, let us talk about that as well. In our slide, the next point is all about the marketing. And this is where things get really fun for any aspiring entrepreneur. Now, what is marketing? Let us talk about that first of all. Marketing is supposed to be something which, as I told you, is basically the other side of the same coin that brand image is on. But then again, marketing can be so much more than just the brand image. Marketing can be something that can go even beyond the representation of your platform. It can be something which establishes your platform even more than anything else. Now, I'm not talking about the various types of marketing. I am talking about marketing itself as a singular terminology. Marketing, more than just an initiative, more than just a process, is supposed to be something that you consider as an entity of your startup itself. You shouldn't be considering this term as an additional initiative that you are taking. Absolutely not. It has to be a part of your business plan. It has to be a part of the functional guideline that you're coming up with. How do you represent your platform on a larger scale has to be a part of the fundamentals with which your startup is functioning. Because for any startup to grow or to even function for the very least, the establishment of it in the marketplace, in the consumer base, in the territory, in the region, and beyond that, in the global level as well, in the longer run perhaps, depends hugely on how the marketing is being done. Now, when we do talk about the various avenues or various types of marketing, there is so much that can be talked of. Perhaps in today's digital era, I think digital marketing itself would be the first and important thing to talk about, because in the modern sense, you might have noticed every single big or small platform has a website. They have a domain, they have a website. Why? Because the consumers, they are the digital consumers in the present tense. Even if you have a store and if you have an online store, chances are that you might be able to grow more from the online store on a global level than from the physical store in a local level. I'm not saying that that is always going to be the case. I'm saying that there is a possibility for it, that you might be able to grow even globally with the website that you create in terms or in comparison to the store that you have where you are able to sell only locally. So that sense of a global connectivity and the global representation of a brand just with the help of a website depends hugely on how the marketing is being conceptualized. And the reason why I say so is because in the tense, in the present area, when we think of the marketing, if I say that this is so important, it is so essential, it can work wonders for your platform, it also means that this can be something which requires a degree of investment as well. Of course, a lot of marketing can be done literally for no cost at all. You can create the posters, you can share about it across all platforms. It can create a hype. But on a more professional level, on a more standardized level, like having, let's say, an online campaign or having an offline campaign or having some physical events just to represent your platform on a better degree, the marketing can be something which requires for you to have the capital that it needs. So marketing can be in both the avenues. It can be paid, it can be unpaid, it can be online, it can be offline. What remains unanimously common across all these different avenues is the importance of it. Like I said in the very initial phase of the session today, in the modern era, in the present tense of the world, you cannot say that whether you want to do the marketing or not. Marketing is something that you need to do. Marketing is something that you have to do. It is not a choice about whether you want to delve in the marketing of your startup or your platform or not. It is about the fact that every startup in the modern tense requires to be marketed, requires to be promoted properly, efficiently, and also effectively, which of course contributes to the efficient and effective growth of the startup as well. Now, as we go further with the session, the next slide is all about the customer service. Now, customer service is something which you need to really value a lot in your entire journey as an aspiring entrepreneur or even as an established entrepreneur, because like I said earlier, it all begins with the ideation of the concept of the product or the services that you're coming up with, but eventually it all comes down to the customers. So if you have happy customers, of course, it will further create more word of mouth marketing, word of mouth promotion of your platform automatically, because customers will refer to other customers your platform and will ask them to check it out. They will also be loyal to the platform for the long term, let's say sustainability, the long term viability of your platform in the marketplace, and you will be able to make sure that whomsoever you are catering to, you are really fulfilling their needs, which is where the important point that I want to emphasize upon comes into play. Fulfill the needs, fulfill the requirements of your customers more than anything else. Sometimes even beyond the commercialities, you have to think about the customers, putting them on the first place, thinking about them as the entity that you as an aspiring entrepreneur depend upon, or your startup entirely depends upon. Because you might be leading the startup, but in some degrees it is genuinely run by the customers that you have. The more customers you have, the more growth there will be of your startup. The less customers that you have, it might be problematic. It is as simple as that. Even if you do consider the commercialities as the focus, as the very center, the core of whatever you are working upon, even then the same analogy applies. You might be leading the startup, you might be conceptualizing the startup, but they are the one, the customers are the one who decide how well and how long a startup works for. For as long as they are loyal to the brand, they are buying the products, of course, the products, the services will be purchased and the startup will grow. So we need to think of the customers as one of the most important, if not the most important entity in the overall acceleration of any startup. And then secondly, value them, respect them as well. Let them know that as the customers, you really value their opinions as well. You are happy to take their feedbacks and you are happy to improve on how much and how well your startup is doing. So in conclusion, make sure that acceleration is something that you look at with a very positive opinion. The growth of your startup is something that you pursue with a great deal of passion, and every startup that you conceptualize is driven by your true, genuine ambition. And we will continue with our discussion about more on the startups, entrepreneurship and the world of business in our other sessions as well. So check out our other videos, and for this video, thank you so much for joining us today.
बिजनेस पाठशाला की बिजनेस आइडिया सेगमेंट में हम रोज आपके लिए लेकर आते हैं कुछ यूजफुल बिजनेस की जानकारी। आज आप जानेंगे फॉरेस्ट बेस्ड बिजनेस आइडियाज के बारे में। आज का हमारा पहला बिजनेस आइडिया है ब्रूमस्टिक मैन्युफैक्चरिंग। ब्रूमस्टिक घर की साफ सफाई में इस्तेमाल होने वाला एक कॉमन प्रोडक्ट है। ये एक तरह की बराबर लंबी घास से तैयार किया जाता है। ब्रूमस्टिक को टाइगर हिल घास को एक समान लंबाई में इकट्ठा करके तार से बांधकर प्लास्टिक हैंडल में फिक्स करके तैयार किया जाता है। ब्रूमस्टिक को फ्लोर क्लीनिंग, डस्ट रिमूवल पर्पस के लिए इंडोर और आउटडोर स्वीपिंग में यूज किया जाता है। अब बात करते हैं ब्रूमस्टिक के बिजनेस रिक्वायरमेंट्स की। तो स्मॉल स्केल पर इस बिजनेस को शुरू करने के लिए 2800 से 3000 स्क्वायर फीट एरिया, 12 से 15 किलोवाट इलेक्ट्रिसिटी कनेक्शन और 6 से 8 मैन पावर की जरूरत होती है। साथ ही इस बिजनेस को शुरू करने के लिए आपको 36 से 40 लाख तक की इन्वेस्टमेंट की आवश्यकता पड़ेगी। इस बिजनेस से आप 20 से 25% तक का मुनाफा भी कमा सकते हैं। बढ़ते हैं हमारे आज के दूसरे बिजनेस आइडिया की ओर, जहां हम आपको बताएंगे डिजाइनर वुडन डोर के बारे में। डिजाइनर वुडन डोर रूम और घर के डोर के रूप में इस्तेमाल होते हैं, जो घर को क्लासी और एलिगेंट लुक देते हैं। इन्हें लकड़ी की सरफेस पर कार्विंग्स करके तैयार किया जाता है। डिजाइनर वुडन डोर बनाने में टीक, ओक, महोगानी और इंडियन रोज वुड का इस्तेमाल होता है। डिजाइनर वुडन डोर की बिजनेस रिक्वायरमेंट कुछ इस प्रकार है। स्मॉल स्केल पर इस बिजनेस को शुरू करने के लिए 2000 से 3000 स्क्वायर फीट एरिया, 45 से 50 किलोवाट इलेक्ट्रिसिटी कनेक्शन, 35 से 40 मैन पावर की आवश्यकता होगी। साथ ही इस बिजनेस को शुरू करने के लिए आपको 18 से 20 लाख की मशीन कॉस्ट की आवश्यकता भी पड़ेगी। इस बिजनेस से आप 12 से 15% तक का मुनाफा भी कमा सकते हैं। आज का हमारा अगला बिजनेस आइडिया है क्रिकेट बैट मैन्युफैक्चरिंग बिजनेस। बैट क्रिकेट में इस्तेमाल किए जाने वाला एक स्पोर्ट्स इक्विपमेंट है। क्रिकेट बैट की जनरल शेप फ्लैट रेक्टेंगुलर होती है, जिसमें सपोर्टिंग हैंडल लगा होता है। क्रिकेट बैट को बनाने के लिए इंडियन कश्मीरी विलो या इंग्लिश विलो का इस्तेमाल होता है। ये प्लेयर्स के हिसाब से बिगनर, इंटरमीडिएट और एडवांस प्लेयर वेरिएंट में आता है। चलिए अब बढ़ते हैं क्रिकेट बैट की बिजनेस रिक्वायरमेंट्स की ओर। स्मॉल स्केल पर ये बिजनेस शुरू करने के लिए 18 से 2000 स्क्वायर फीट एरिया, 8 से 10 किलोवाट इलेक्ट्रिसिटी कनेक्शन, 3 से 5 मैन पावर और 12 से 15 लाख तक की इन्वेस्टमेंट की जरूरत होगी। इस बिजनेस से आप 10 से 15% तक का मुनाफा भी कमा सकते हैं। बढ़ते हैं हमारे आज के आखिरी बिजनेस आइडिया की ओर, जहां हम बात करेंगे एरिका लीफ कटलरी बिजनेस के बारे में। एरिका लीफ कटलरी डिस्पोजल प्रोडक्ट के लिए एक नए कॉन्सेप्ट जैसा है। एरिका पाल्म ट्री से प्राप्त होता है। एरिका लीफ से बनाए गए प्रोडक्ट नॉन डिग्रेडेबल प्लास्टिक कटलरी प्रोडक्ट का एक अच्छा सब्स्टिट्यूट है। एरिका लीफ कटलरी नॉन टॉक्सिक, लाइट वेटेड, हाइजेनिक और हर तरह के केमिकल से फ्री होती है। इसमें प्लास्टिक कटलरी से ज्यादा स्ट्रेंथ होती है। एरिका लीफ कटलरी को सिंगल यूज कटलरी आइटम के रूप में इस्तेमाल किया जाता है। एरिका लीफ कटलरी बिजनेस की रिक्वायरमेंट्स कुछ इस प्रकार हैं। इस बिजनेस को शुरू करने के लिए 1300 से 1500 स्क्वायर फीट एरिया की जरूरत होगी। साथ ही 12 किलोवाट इलेक्ट्रिसिटी कनेक्शन, 3 से 5 मैन पावर और 12 लाख से 15 लाख तक की इन्वेस्टमेंट की जरूरत पड़ेगी। इस बिजनेस से आप 10 से 15% तक का मुनाफा भी कमा सकते हैं। तो ये थे हमारे आज के बिजनेस आइडियाज। उम्मीद है आज के बिजनेस आइडियाज आपको पसंद आए होंगे। अभी आप हमसे जूम सेशन के माध्यम से एक्सपर्ट से डायरेक्टली इंटरेक्ट कर सकते हैं। जूम सेशन का लिंक आपको यूट्यूब के चैट बॉक्स पे मिल जाएगा। धन्यवाद।